Well, welcome back. Just want to give you a little updates here. On this episode here that I'm going to be doing is in regards to the Retropi, with the Raspberry Pi actually. And what I'm going to do is try to introduce the parts required to make yourself your own homebrew Retropi gaming console. Uh, the thing I won't go into great details on what games to get for it, but enough that you can actually build your own RetroPie with the parts that are available that you can actually get at your local electronics store that is close by to where you live, and be able to put one together, and the required software that you can actually use. I'll provide some links where to get the actual RetroPie that you can actually burn onto the SD card. Uh, I won't provide specific links to torrent sites for uh, these customized links that they have already provided for uh, already pre-made consoles that are already pre-installed onto the SD card itself, because uh, do, doing this is kind of illegal, because depending where you live, like in the States or in Canada as example, there are certain governing laws prohibiting you to actually have XYZ ROMs available to you in order to play these games. What I can only suggest is, if you are interested in making your own RetroPie, I'll provide you the links of what to get. As for software and all that, you can do an easy search in regards to these ROMs through Google itself, and you can actually download those ROMs and then basically slide them into the Raspberry Pi itself, depending on which emulator that you have already installed, and just by a simple reboot of the system itself, you should be able to play these games without any problems. I'm also going to provide some simple gameplay. Well, not gameplay itself, but the actual what looks like a fantastic introduction of the RetroPie itself. And I'll show you what one gentleman had done with the RetroPie itself, which is very, how can I say, not unique, but a good uh, thing there to emulate for the arcades, like a track mode for it. So I'll show you the track mode itself, but I won't go into actually playing some of the games due to the copyright infringements and all that. But enough to say, look, this is what you can actually do with the Raspberry Pi in comparison with these other new, like the NES Classics, where they have like 30 games already pre-installed, where you have actually other systems set up. So with this here, it'll give you a good idea of actually setting up your own RetroPie, either with a current LCD screen like I have here at home, or on your old CRT screen. This is a very unique system that I find that is very useful, considering I'm an old gamer myself. I used to have at least one gaming console, which was the Intellivision itself, going way back in 1979, 1980 when I was a kid. My parents, I was very fortunate for my parents to be able to have something like this at home. Both my brother and I both enjoyed the Intellivision itself and the different components that was available for it. So this here, I would highly suggest, if you are interested in something like this, it can be readily it can be readily had at your local electronics store if they have it available. Some specialty stores like the Source, Radio Shack may not have this available, but there are certain electronic stores like Mad Electronics, which is close by to where I live, have these things available for you to actually purchase and put together for yourself. One thing I might add in as well, I had two other what they call SD cards, which I had actually pre-formatted with one for a simple desktop environment, and the other one I actually found on Raspberry Pi, where you can actually make it a media center, where you can actually uh, use like an external hard drive or something like similar to using a what they call is a USB stick, which is readily available. Everybody knows about those things, and you can use that as an external hard drive for it to play videos at home on your big screen TV or on your CRT screen. So what I'm going to be doing here is showing the components that you would require in order to do so. Okay, so bear with me. My arm is still trying to heal here, so I'm going to set up a small little desktop or a little environment here, where I'm going to show you the components. I'm going to set my little digital camera up, this little guy here, on a tripod, so that way it makes it a little bit easier instead of trying to use my fractured arm to actually hold the camera, to at least give you an idea of what to look for. Okay, so bear with me while I get this here done, and hopefully this will be something interesting that maybe you might be interested in doing yourself, for nostalgic purposes, of course, and to have fun. And this is basically a part of this tech review here for this on the Retropi. So let's get going. Let's see what we can do on getting the parts and all that required. Okay, here it is. This is the Raspberry Pi 3, which is basically a computer on a credit card size computer. It has basically 4 USB ports, a 10100. It has also a wireless and AC connection right here, and also Bluetooth 4.0, which gives it a possibility to go wireless if you have a wireless router. And it is compliant up to the latest one, which is wireless and AC. So that's a good thing there if you want to use the wireless on it. So it'll go great. This is the memory underneath, right here where my thumb is at, and a micro SD slot for the actual operating system and disk. Basically, it's a micro SD card. You can go anywhere between 2 gigabytes, and I think right now at this point in time, the largest one that I've seen so far as for the SD cards is up to 128 gigabytes. It also has the capability of putting a display port right here, a camera. It has HDMI right here, and composite. So this here is basically where my middle finger is here, is the composite 3.5 millimeter to RCA, both audio and video, which is great. This is the HDMI. It can go up to 1080p without any problems, and that's the power supply right there where my other finger is. So that's a good little thing to have here. So this is basically for the Retropi itself. This is the main guts of the computer. So let's go take a look at the casing itself, which is not that great, but it's good to have. Basically, here's the bottom of the case, and basically you would put your Raspberry Pi in like so. Sorry for my hands here. Let me just get it in there so that way you can get to see it properly in the case. Come on, you. Don't you love it when you try to practice outside? It works the way you want to, but then when you actually go do a recording, it doesn't go. So you would have the casing like that. This here, these pins right here are the general input-output. So this is actually, you can actually do projects with this, where you have your plugs placed into there. So there we go. Get this tight casings on. I'm doing this all off camera just to sub-assemble it here for you. And that's what it looks like in its casing. This is the default one, which I actually picked up. The casing itself I actually picked up. It was about $17 Canadian. There are other casings out available for it, so you can choose the type of casing you want. The Raspberry Pi itself goes online for about $35 directly at Raspberry Pi themselves. It also depends where you go in regards to getting the Raspberry Pi, so it'll vary price-wise. I picked this here up at my local computer store, which, well, not computer store, but an electronics store, which specializes in odd parts, specialty parts, and I was able to get it for about $89. And here's the casing that goes on top of it. So that's basically the case itself. So as you can see here, it shows you with little diagrams the HDMI, the power supply, the composite, as well as the availability for your Ethernet, your four USBs, and a place right here to put your micro SD card in. So that is good. As for memory wise, now this will vary from place to place. This one here is an SD card from Staples, 64 gigs. You can use anywhere between 2 and 64 gigs or up to 128 gigs with the Raspberry Pi. But just be forewarned, depending on the type of games you're going to put in on the Retropi, some of them will take a lot and some won't take as much. So I would usually go, if I would be you, if you really needed the space, is to go with the 128 gig one. This one is the black and blue. You can use the 64s without any problems, as well as a 32 if you're only putting a limited amount. So you can use Lexar, Staples, Kingston, which I've been using for the longest time in regards to it. So they're all good, they all run. What I'm going to do is I'm going to provide later on in the link the actual application to use. And here is the card reader itself, which is I basically use for putting the ISOs, what they call ISO images, onto the SD card. So if you don't have an SD card reader on the computer, like your laptop or your desktop, you can pick these here up. These are relatively inexpensive. You're looking at maybe $4 or $5, and they include the different connections on it, the micro SD card, the regular SD card, and all that, which can be added in. So let me show you the joysticks I'm going to be using here. I'll be right back. Okay, as for the other parts that you'll be needing, here's something that you'll be definitely needing, is a standard USB keyboard. This is actually being used with the Retropi itself, just to be able to put the credits in, which is usually the number 5, and choosing between players 1 and players 2 depending on the game itself. This is usually what's added in. And also when you have to go into command line on the Raspberry Pi itself, in case you have to do any updates, at least you have a keyboard connected to it as well with it. That's one of the other things that I would always suggest having with this, because for the simple fact is that every so often, like once a week at least, there's an update or something like that, or if you have to do something within the command line, you have at least a keyboard available. So that's this here that you need as well. The other thing you're going to be needing, and here it is a combination, and I'll show you here quickly if I can get it apart, is this little guy here. This is a two-prong, as you can see here, two-prong to USB with a 2.4 to 2.5 amp connection. So this is actually a USB plug that you'll need to plug into the outlet to power it up, as well as this little guy, which is the basically a USB to small D connection. So you'll be needing that as well. This here is just to power the actual Raspberry Pi itself while you have it plugged into the wall and hooked up to the HDMI. The cable itself for the HDMI is a standard HDMI cable, which I think everybody can actually pick up at the local store, which is not so much of a problem. Now, as for the joystick, now I paid attention to this when going through the Retropi itself. I had actually picked up a Logitech Logitech E310. This is the one here. It looks like a PS2, PS3 connection joystick itself. And here's underneath, in case you're wondering, seeing what it looks like underneath as well, which has 4 buttons, left and right, for the side scrollers, like for shifting and all that, and then you have your A, B, X, and Y, along with 2 analogs and your D-pad. This is also a USB connection, which lets you actually connect it without any problems. So this is what I highly suggest for getting connected together. Once you do have this here set up, the first time around, when you go through the emulation station on Retropi, it'll ask you for the joystick first to get it configured. Once you get it configured, you'll be perfectly set up for the rest of the time that you have your different ROMs in there. So that'll be including your favorite game titles from the Atari, the Intellivision, like I liked with my brother, along with Commodore and all those other ones. The Retropi doesn't come already installed with the emulations on them. Those you have to manually enter them in. I'll try to provide a list, or at least a link on Wikipedia for the Retropi, so you can actually see which binaries you need for the actual emulations, so you can actually install them in one at a time. So let me get this connected. I'm going to show you the Retro Arcade or Retropi Attract mode on the Retropi itself, so that way you get an idea of what it looks like. And surprisingly enough, it's very awesome to see that actually being done, because not many people have that in the Retropi itself, but this guy by the name of Ray has it already built in, and it's fantastic. So let's take a look at it right now. And here we are. This is the attract mode of the Raspberry Pi, of the Retropi, with the version of Ray's Retropi. Now here is just the main menu of what's available as for the different systems from the MAME arcades and a few others. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Donkey Kong Collection here and just show you what's available. No. Now here is a sample of the actual arcade game with Donkey Kong Jr. Now you have different ones there, as you can see. Here, let me just... Now you probably can't not hear it too well, but that's what is there. And you can also go through different ones to the different sections of MAME. But that's basically about it. I won't go through the actual gameplay itself, but this gives you an overall sense of the game itself. And if you ever do want to try this, I do highly suggest to actually download this and actually have some fun with it. Other than that, that's basically about it. So let me get back to the computer and we'll talk a little bit more about this, okay? Anyways, there you go. As you saw, the Raspberry Pi being worked on as a Retropi with the 128 gigabyte version of the Retropi itself, which is really good. I mean, overall, I mean, I didn't show any gameplay or go through anything, not to to get a red flag on my videos here. But those things you can actually go through uTorrent or Google the actual ISO for them. That's where you can actually download them depending on the size, because there's basically about three different versions: a 32, a 64, and a 128 gigabyte version of the Retropi with some ISOs on it. Now the only problem with that there is, and again, and I'll say this and I'm reiterating it if I didn't mention it before, if I did, I'm just stressing it out here, especially for those who live in the States and in Canada, and depending on where you are living in different parts of the world, there are some laws pertaining to copyright copyright things in regards to the actual cartridges that are for each individual game per console. So I don't want anybody to go out there and say, well, he told me you can download it, it's no problem. Again, it's just to make sure that everybody's aware that if you don't have the original cartridge and you're downloading ones that you're not supposed to have for the Retropi, that's a gray scale. That's a gray area where you might get into some trouble, and I don't like seeing people, even myself, to get into that type of trouble with the law in regards to something like that. So I just want to put that down as a side note to it. Otherwise, the Retropi does very well on playing games overall. The one thing I do want to mention as well is when you do go and burn the ISOs onto the SD cards, you may have to go through a subsection of the configuration to update it to the latest version. Because with the Retropi, when you download it directly from the author of it, that's perfectly fine, because that'll be the most recent one. But at a later time, when they go from version 4.1 to, let's say, version 5, you can easily download it in the background, because there is a section in the Retropi where you can actually update it on a weekly basis. Whereas on the other ones, the RAY versions, they may be on an earlier version of the ISO, and you may have to update it right away after you configure the joystick controller for it. So that there, you just want to take into consideration, update it and update it frequently. In some cases, I didn't have a chance to show within the particular ISO of RAYs, the 128 gigabyte. There will be some where it won't be working properly for the emulation. In cases like that, what you can do is there's a set of options under other packages where you can actually install from source code the actual emulation, the emulator themselves, so that way you can get an up-to-date and a proper emulation for that particular console to make the game work. Sometimes it might be the emulation, sometimes it might be the actual game itself that's not properly installed or was not properly packaged. So double check on both sides. If you do have a proper emulation that's been compiled from source, then you should be fine on that. Then it's just a matter of re-downloading and reopening that one particular game and putting it onto the Retropi itself. The other thing I did not have a chance to do, which I may do at a later date, I do have some games from the Intellivision which I'm going to add into it, and I'll eventually will show how to do that, because there's two ways of doing it. One is through a USB stick, the other one is through your network, either through a wired or a wireless network. Since I have both of them here, both wired and wireless, the actual Retropi is actually away from any physical connection, so I'm using the wireless connectivity on it. So you can easily push it to the Retropi itself into the subfolder that you want to put that particular ISO in for that particular emulation end game. The other thing is, as well, as once you do that, and I'll show that at that later date, is you might have to reboot it back up again in order for it to detect the games for that particular emulation, because it won't show up automatically. I'm hoping that this gives you a fairly good start on with the Retropi itself for all the games that are available for it, which is quite a bit. Like the 128 gigabyte version, there is something close to, I think, about 15 or 16,000. The 64 and the 32, I'm not too sure on how much there are on each of those. I haven't gone through those personally, but I've just tried the 128. So you're looking at maybe half the stuff on the 64, and maybe half of what the 64 has. So it gives you a chance to actually fiddle around with it a little bit, and I hope you guys had a good time. I'll be putting in the description the link for the Retropi itself, where you can actually download it to load it from, and the software to use to format the SD cards, and the disk writer for the Windows version. Since I don't have a Mac itself, you can easily Google that as well for the Mac version to write the ISOs onto the SD card. Okay, so for now, this is going to be it for the tech review for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Click on thumbs up if you like it, thumbs down if you didn't like it. I'm hoping that you'll give me the thumbs up instead. Have yourself a great week, folks.